You want to come sit here and I'll wait for you
No, you can stay right there.
Yeah, okay.
Hello. Greetings, everybody. So glad to have all of you here with us locally as well as all over the world. We're so grateful to have Avi Lipkin with us. We're very excited because he's been coming off and on here for about 15 years, something like that. Could you tell us a website that people can go to if they want to get some of your things?
Okay, it's called biblicalalliance.com. That's an easy name to remember, biblicalalliance.com. And of course, there's also the Bible Block website for the party, and there are a lot of things there too, so check them out.
All right, thank you. His son, Aaron Lipkin, was here not too long ago talking about the find up on Mount Ebal, and Joshua's altar, for those of you that haven't made the connection yet. But we're so excited to have him here because every time he comes, he's one of those that stirs the pot. Hey, he's the one that says things a lot of people don't say. And that's why I really appreciate him, and I'm so glad that he's with us. Let's give him a big hand. Yay!
Thank you. Okay, and I want to thank Mark for so graciously allowing me to speak for 3 hours. And actually, I told him the Baptists give me 20 minutes and the Pentecostals give me an hour and a half, and I've got 20 hours of teaching. So the good news is you're not going to get 20 hours tonight. And I'm very happy to be here. It's been quite a few years, actually, that I have not come to the Pacific Northwest. Ever since the days of Chuck Missler, and rest in peace. So I miss him also very much, and hopefully because of this group and Mark Biltz, I hope to be back here again in May, June, if there are those of you who are not afraid of snowing in May, June and come back. So I'm trying to think what I'm going to say because, like I said, I have about 20 hours of teaching. And what I'm giving you is the tips of about 4 or 5 icebergs and trying to connect it all together. The first thing I want to say is that I don't know how many people here knew that I had created 4 years ago a Judeo-Christian Bible Block party running for the Knesset. I see 2 hands, 3 hands. So most of you never heard of it, but Israel is a very mighty, powerful country. We have 40 political parties. And there is only one party that offers Christian and Messianic candidates, and that is Israel's Bible Block Gush HaTanachi party, which is the party that I created. I was preaching about this for 25 years. I had to raise $100,000. The checks were not made out to me, obviously. They were made out to the lawyers. And the party was registered 2018, April 15th. And so the party is now in existence in perpetuity, God willing. And so we have Christians, we have Messianics, and of course we have regular Jewish people. So what I want to do actually is start the message with my interpretation of American history, and why I think the Bible Block Party is the proper export from American history and American politics to the Israeli politics. Israel is a country of primarily Jews who came from former Soviet socialist republics, not with democratic tradition. The other half of Israel's population came from Islamic countries, like my wife, came from Egypt. Also, no real democratic background to the immigrants who came from those Islamic countries. Good people, good Jewish people, but as I say in the churches here in America, we don't got no Anglo-Saxon Protestant Jews in Israel. And by the way, when I say, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, it refers to black Anglo-Saxon Protestants and Hindu and Chinese Anglo-Saxon Protestants. All those who subscribe to the Protestant Reformation and the greatness of America from day one. I feel like we're in a Hollywood movie now. And, Hollywood movies very often begin with the end of the movie, and then the rest is flashbacks. And one of the things I wanted to share, maybe some of you will get up and walk out the moment I say it now, but better that you know where I'm going, and then if you're still interested in staying, you can see me fill in the spaces. I believe that we Jews and Christians who are praying to the same God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who believe in the same Tanakh, same Old Testament. Of course, Jews have the Talmud and the Christians have the New Testament. And for those of you who have studied both the New Testament and the Talmud, you know that there are great similarities in the genre of these two books. And they're all pretty much from 1,500 to 2,000 years ago. So we have the same God, we have the same Old Testament, and guess what? The Messiah is a Jew from Israel who speaks Hebrew. And we know that the Messiah is going to appear on the Mount of Olives. So there is a Jewish joke confirmed in the Gospel of John. I heard this in the Prime Minister's office when I worked there in 1990. And the joke goes like this. The red phone rings on Netanyahu's desk, the emergency phone, and it's the head of the Israeli Mossad, or Secret Service. And the head of the Mossad says, we have a problem. The Messiah is here now, standing on the Mount of Olives. What do we do with him? And how many people heard this joke? And so Netanyahu says, give me 5 minutes, I'll call you right back. Hangs up the phone, calls up Ben Gurion Airport, asks for the head of the Israeli passport control at the airport, and tells him to shine his shoes, button his shirt, look nice, drive up to the Mount of Olives a half hour away, and go up to the Messiah and say, excuse me, sir, is this your first visit to the Holy Land? So that's the Jewish version of the story. I'll give you the Christian version. After the resurrection, Jesus appears unto his pupils, and he announces who he is. And the pupils say, how do we know you are who you say you are? Because they didn't recognize him. And he said, look at my hands and look at my feet. Look at the piercings. So one of the things that proves is there are many Christian believers who have scales on their eyes, and they don't see it also. So the bottom line is the Jewish Messiah will be standing on the Mount of Olives, and whether it's the first or second coming, this will be shown to us by looking at the hands. I accept that. So the end time message today is that we are privileged to be alive at this time. We are the generation, I believe, that will witness the coming or the return of the Messiah on the Mount of Olives. For us, Jews and Christians, I believe there will be a happy ending. And I'll explain exactly how the happy ending will be as I fill in the spaces. But what I want to do is I want to talk about the preparations that we all have to make together to prepare for the coming or the return of the Messiah. And there are a lot of preparations that have to be done. This is not something that, guess what, God's going to do everything for us and Messiah's going to do everything for us. No, we have to show ourselves worthy for the Messiah to show up on the Mount of Olives. So we're going to get into that. So I have to tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in the United States. My parents were from Argentina. So Argentine Spanish is my mother tongue. My grandparents came from Russia and Poland, so I definitely have an entree to the Eastern Europe. I studied Russian at New York University and then Hebrew University at the height of the Cold War, 66 to 71, because I believed to defeat the Russians, the communists, you have to know them. And so I studied Russian, and I studied Sovietology, and I studied communism. These are all interesting things to study. Then, of course, with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, I said to myself that I was an idiot for studying something that was finished. Because Sovietology, once Soviet communism collapsed, there's no more Sovietology. But I think Putin proved that it was important for me to study East European studies. It was important to understand who the Russians are and who the Ukrainians are and what America is facing, what Israel is facing. And One of the things that I learned in Hebrew school as a young boy in New York was that all Christians are bad. I was taught this in Hebrew school. This was not in Orthodox Jewish Hebrew school. This was in conservative Temple Israel of Great Neck. And we were taught all Christians are bad and that there was going to be a Holocaust in the United States one day. And because if there was a Holocaust in every country in Europe, it fits the reason that there's going to be a Holocaust in America eventually too. At age 15, I corresponded with David Ben-Gurion, our first prime minister. And if you remind me in the morning, Mark, I will give you a copy of the letters that Ben-Gurion wrote to me. And he said to me that in the first letter, he said, Jews cannot be Jews unless they live in Israel. And which of course aroused a tremendous debate in the country. And then he said in the second letter that the Jews, if they don't move to Israel, they will assimilate, they will disappear. He didn't talk about Holocaust. He said they will intermarry with the Christians and disappear. I'm going to come to this also now in the question about why did the Jews vote Democrat. Are there any Democrats here? Okay. And I love the Democrats. They know not what they do. Anyway. And so I decided at age 15 that I was going to leave America because if the Christians hate us and there's going to be a Holocaust here, why should I stay here? The best thing is to pick up and leave. And at age 19, I moved to Israel. And this was 54 years ago. Then, after 1 year being in Israel, I meet my wife, Rachel. And a long story, but it was hate at first sight. And we were both on a bus, and she was with a group of Argentine communists who were ridiculing me because of the way I was dressed. I was wearing a Beitar Youth Movement uniform. And so I turned around, because Argentine Spanish is my mother tongue, and I started yelling at her. I thought she was with the group because they were all holding their Shabbat supermarket purchases. And my wife said to me, listen, I'm not with those people who are making fun of you. She knew something was going on. And I said, you're not from Argentina? She said, no. So I said, where are you from? I'm from Egypt, my wife said. And I said, you're from Egypt? Firstly, I apologized. I was yelling at the wrong person. And secondly, can I interview you? Because I had a Hebrew University newspaper that I was editing, I was publishing. And so can I interview you? She said, yes. So I carried her bags, to the dorm room. And 2 years later, we got married. And see, today, if you yell at a woman on a bus, you'll be arrested for harassment. And it was hate at first sight, and then we got married. But the point was, I said to her, make me a cup of coffee. And so she went to make me a cup of coffee. Then she came back, and there was a table full of food. I said, that's the one. And I have a wife who says, you're too fat, go on a diet. Here, have some more. And so before I could ask her any questions, Rachel says to me, first I have to ask you a question. Are you crazy? I mean, this is our first date. It wasn't a date, it was an interview, but it was a date. And she says, are you crazy? I said, why am I crazy? Why did you leave America? America is the greatest country on earth. Everyone wants to live in America, and you came to Israel. Israel's a war zone. And I said to her, because the Goyim hate us. How many people know the word Goyim? Goyim is a pejorative term for somebody in America who's not a Jew. So what does it mean? It means the Christians. So my wife said to me, are you saying the Christians are Goyim? They're Gentiles? I said, yes, you're a Jew or you're a Goy. You're a Jew or you're a Gentile. How many people here are Gentiles? This group needs a lot of work. So you're going to leave here very changed tonight after you hear the next few sentences. She said to me, so you're saying the Christians are Gentiles? I said, yes. I said, well, not only are you crazy, you also don't know anything. I mean, my wife, from first sight, she had it figured out. That's how she had to control me. And for 52 years, my wife always starts every conversation with, you're crazy, you don't know anything. And God is extremely merciful that she hasn't killed me yet. But anyway, so she says to me, Christians are not Gentiles. Gentiles in Hebrew is goyim, and it refers to the nations that were not at Mount Sinai. If the nations were not at Mount Sinai, then they are Gentiles. Now, if you believe in Jesus Christ, then you are grafted in to Mount Sinai. Amen? Gentile means pagans. Okay, so all those who raised their hands that you're Gentiles, how many people here are pagans? So you got something, that guy over there raised his hand. Okay. So the first thing I learned from my wife, this was January 14th, 1970, was that Christians are not Gentiles. They may not be Jewish rabbinically, but as it says in Romans, y'alls are the branches and we alls are the roots, but we are one tree. Okay. And I always listen to my wife. Sometimes it takes 20 years before I understand what she's saying. And when I was 41, I went for the first time in my life to a Pentecostal church in New Braunfels, Texas. And Nancy, the Yellow Rose of Texas, got me to speak in that church, but also to visit. I was 41, a Jew from America who moved to Israel. I had never been in a church all my life. And I got up, of course, the Jew with the yarmulke on his head gets the best seat in the house. You know, they have the front row roped off for guests. So I got the best seat in the house. And I'm standing with everyone else while they're praise worshiping, and all of a sudden, I see all these men and women falling to the ground. I said, is there some kind of plague here in the church that they don't know about? I mean, this is a trip for a Jew to see something like this. And then they start covering up the women with towels. I say, what's this business with towels? Give them a blanket. And then after 5-10 minutes, all of a sudden there was a miracle in the church. Everybody got up. And I said, I have never seen something like this before. Jews don't go to church, so Jews don't know what this is. And then the pastor gets up, Pastor Don Duncan, rest in peace, and he starts talking about Israel, the importance of Israel for every Bible-believing Christian. And everybody was crying tears for Israel. And in that church, you had white people, black people, Native Americans, and Tex-Mex. 400 people. And they were all holding hands, praising the Lord. And I said, all of a sudden, the lights went on. This is the real America. And I said to myself, you know what? If a Jew, Orthodox Jew, any kind of Jew, does not go to church on Sunday, that Jew cannot understand the love that the Christians have for us. Do you remember getting to know you, getting to know all about you? By the way, what is anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism is when any one group hates another group, and usually they don't even know what that group stands for or what they are. By the way, I have to tell you, my sister is a real, I don't want to say what she is, but she's a Democrat. And she said, where are you now? I said, I'm in Texas. So she said to me, oh, I hate Texas. I said to my sister, you hate Texas? Have you ever been in Texas? My sister said, no. So I said to my sister, you know what? You're an anti-Semite against Texans. So anti-Semites are usually ignorant people of any group that hate any other group. That's the way I see it. And I say to the Jews, you need to go to church on Sunday in order to begin to understand that the Christians in America are not our best friends, they are our only friends. So what do the Jews say to me? We don't go to synagogue on Saturday. You want us to go to church on Sunday? And then I say to them, you need to read the New Testament. The New Testament is a Jewish book. And they say to me, we don't read the Old Testament. You want us to read the New Testament? I don't know if you can understand my frustration at meeting people, not only all over the United States, but in Israel also, and all over the world. And my granddaughters came home from school. Aaron's daughters came home from Orthodox Jewish school and asked us, why do our teachers teach us that the Christians are all bad? That's now in Israel. And the coalition that Netanyahu is trying to form, we don't know yet if he's going to succeed. Probably he will. But the Orthodox groups in Israel hate the Christians. Why? Because of what happened over 2,000 years, anti-Semitism. Do you know there's a saying in English, you may be right, but you may be dead right. Israel cannot survive without the Christian allies. Now, not all Christians love the Jews. I would say 95% of the Christians don't love the Jews. But 5% of 2 billion is 100 million. And it is to those people we need to reach out, and to the Messianic groups. I was born in New York. I spent the first 19 years of my life in New York, and I was raised on the lap of the American Revolution. No taxation without representation. And I moved to Israel, and then I come back to the States the last 32 years. 32 years I'm preaching, I've been in 1,000 churches and Messianic groups. And I see the love that these people have for me and for my people, for Israel. They love us. And I look at the way they are brought up in the American way and in the Protestant way. Protestant Reformation was a tremendous breakthrough. Because as you probably know, until the year 1053, there was one church until the split with the Orthodox Christians. And then in the 1500s came the Protestant Reformation. But the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholics were not friends to the Jews. There was terrible persecution. And even Martin Luther and other certain Protestants were not friends to the Jews. So when you look at it today, you start doing the numbers, there are 100 million born-agains who love the Jews. Because you can't be a Christian, you can't be a Bible believer and hate the Jews. Well, the Jews, you can describe them in many ways. Also, Genesis 12:3, it's not that they are the cornerstone of the world, that all those who bless Israel will be blessed, and all those who curse Israel will be cursed. And what is the country in the world that has blessed the Jews the most? The United States of America. And it's not because the United States is the United States. It's because the ethic of the American people is the Protestant ethic. Even in the Catholic churches in America today, they've become Protestantized. The Jews in America have become Protestantized. In other words, there's a certain ethic about being an American which makes it very hard to hate any one specific group, this or that. And so in my 1,000 churches that I've been in, and I'm saying you need to support Israel, and then Christians say to me, well, tell me something, because many of them know, that there are no Christians in the Israeli Knesset. Knesset, if you know the word ecclesia, it's all the same root. It's where everyone is gathered. The Knesset is our Congress, our parliament, and we have 120 members of Knesset. We have Muslims, we have Druze. Druze are a small group in the north of Israel. We don't have any Christians. I'm going to get to that. What I'm trying to do now, before I explain the political arrangements, I'm trying to explain the basis of how the Israeli people were formed, because the Israeli people are a new thing. Really. It's not the Jews of 2,000 years ago. The political system is, well, in England you have primarily Tories and liberals. Like in America, you have Republicans and Democrats. What we have in Israel is 40 political parties. Any party that has aspirations of getting into the Knesset has to have at least 140 or 150,000 votes. Then, when all the parties' votes are counted, the 120 members of the Knesset, it's like one pie, one constituency. It has to be divided up according to the numbers. And I started thinking to myself, there are different types of Christians living in the land of Israel. You have the Arab Christians, who are about 2%. You have about 6% of our population Russian-speaking Christians from the former Soviet Union. That's 8%. Now we have Ethiopians coming in. Some of them are Christian believers also. Nobody's represented in the Knesset yet of the Christian groups. Now, I did not form a Christian party. I founded a Judeo-Christian Alliance party, because I don't look at this only as what's happening in Israel. I look at an international coalition of Jews and Christians who stand together for the same basic values, the same political values. And like I said before, half the population of the Jews came from former Soviet socialist countries that do not have a democratic background, and half came from Islamic countries, like my wife, from Egypt, where there are no democratic values. Now, what I want to do is I want to change course for a moment, get back to the early days of America. I'll also explain to you why Jews vote Democrat. It sounds strange. Why am I talking about Israel and then I'm talking about Democrats? But this makes sense. I don't know if you remember Fiddler on the Roof. Fiddler on the Roof, in a certain way, Hollywood makes it look like a spoof, but it's not a spoof. It's very serious. And there's a part there where Tevye, the milkman, the hero of this musical play, is pointing his finger at God. He's in the loft in his barn, and he says, "Why did you choose us to be the chosen nation? Couldn't you just choose somebody else to be the chosen nation? Do you know, God, how much trouble you've gotten us into? The persecution, the killings, the expulsions. Go choose somebody else." There was another part also in Fiddler on the Roof where a Bolshevik Jewish communist activist appears in the synagogue to warn the rabbi and the Jews of Anatevka that there was about to be a pogrom instigated by the Tsar, and that they would eventually be expelled from their village, which is what happened. This is the tragedy of the movie. So these two things show that many Jewish people felt a bitterness against God in the 1800s. And the natural thing for them was, if God is responsible for choosing us as the chosen people, which involve all this hatred and all this suffering, the way to get rid of the suffering is to abolish God. Some of the Jews became very Orthodox. They just didn't want to pay attention to it. And some of the Jews picked up and left. Some went to America, some went to Palestine, the Turkish Empire. And I'm going to do a little sidebar. In Europe, after World War II, the Europeans kind of came to a conclusion. What's the conclusion? Are we Europeans crazy? Why are we killing each other? In other words, white European Christians slaughtering each other for 2,000 years, going back to the Romans. Why are we killing each other? And the answer that the conclusion the Europeans came to was, all of this is because of God. All of this is because of the Bible. All of this is because of Jesus Christ. This is the Europeans now, the European Union. I'm a stamp collector. So I don't know if you remember, in the early 50s, there were stamps that came out that said Benelux. Benelux was Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg. 3 little teeny-weeny countries merging together economically. Then it became 10-nation common market. And then postage stamps came out, which said common market. And then it grew to 26 nations, European Union. The bottom line of the European Union is, we should never, ever again have a war between white European Christians. And you know what? They kind of succeeded until Russia invaded Ukraine. And also the Yugoslav War. But the Yugoslav War was also a religious war, because it was Serbian Orthodox, Croatian Catholics, and Bosnian Muslims. So you have 3 different groups there with 2,000 years of hatred between them among the Christians and 1,400 years with the Bosnian Muslims. So the Jews also had this. The Jews, many of them became communists and socialists and Marxists because God is to blame for choosing us as his chosen people, which caused us all these difficulties. So many people in the beginning of the Communist Party were Jews. And I know from my own family that many communists in my family, that God was the troublemaker. There were terrible horrors in Europe if you were a Jew. Okay, why did the Jews vote Democrat? Now, I have to go back a little bit to American history. And again, I am an avid fan of American history. The Jews were here in the 1600s. I don't know if you remember, New Amsterdam under Dutch, Peter Stuyvesant, 1648, there was a Jewish community there because the Jews escaped from the Catholic persecutions in Europe, came to America. Providence, Rhode Island, Charleston, South Carolina, Savannah, Georgia, Jewish communities have been there for 500 years. I even spent the Shabbat with a Jewish family in Charleston, South Carolina. They're 11th generation American. Very impressive. And in the American Revolutionary War, I don't know if you know this or not, but Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, George Washington comes to the Jews of Philadelphia and says the revolution is bankrupt. If you Jews don't go home and bring all your gold, the British will hang you and hang us. How many people heard of Haim Solomon? When you go home, check out Haim Solomon. The U.S. Post Office issued a stamp in memory of Haim Solomon. The Jews came back with $30 million of gold bullion. The Jews saved the American Revolution. The Jews helped Washington get out of the bankruptcy. Also, yeah, not only that, Christmas, 1777, there were 500 Jews guarding Valley Forge while the Christians prayed the Christian services. There were 500 revolutionary soldiers who were Jews. So the Jews were here and they fought. I don't know how many of you are Navy people, but there is a chapel in Annapolis called the Uriah Levy. I see you're nodding your head, yes. Uriah Levy was a Jewish boy who ran away from home, good Jewish family, ran away from home because he wanted to be in the Navy. And as a young kid, I'm talking about 11 years old, he wanted to be a cabin boy. And the agreement was with the parents that for his bar mitzvah, he would go home to do his bar mitzvah at age 13. And he went right back to the Navy. He spent his whole life in the Navy. And in 1803, he was part of from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. He fought the Barbary pirates. And he became Commodore. A Jewish boy became a Commodore in the U.S. Navy. There are many stories like this. Now, in the American Civil War, and I have to be careful how I say it so nobody will pick on me, but there were so many Jews in the Confederate Army that when the Jews came to Jefferson Davis and said, we want to go home for our Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, he said, God forbid, if you Jews go home, the Confederate Army collapses. President Lincoln established the chaplaincy for the Jewish soldiers in the Civil War. So when I'm in a church or when I'm in any group and I'm teaching this and I point my finger at the people, I say, do you know where these Jews are? Nobody knows. And I say, you are those Jews because all of you had some kind of a great-great-great-grandfather or great-great-great-grandmother and nobody knew she was Jewish, but she just wanted to blend in and be an American because the American ethic was to love the Jews. Love God, love the Bible. You cannot love Jesus Christ if you hate the Jews. So this is something that goes back. So now what happens is, one of two ways to destroy the Jewish people. One is you kill them, like happened in Europe, or you marry them, in which case the children eventually become Christian. So these Jews from 500 years ago, they're not around anymore because they are you. So who votes Democrat? The Jews who came in the last 100 years. They came from the Russian persecutions, the Polish, the Ukrainian, the Nazi Holocaust, the Catholic Inquisition, all the suffering that happened in Europe. So they came here and they look at a church steeple with a cross and they project the hatred of what happened in Europe 1900 years to what they saw in the church. I know because I was like that. I used to not like crosses. You know, I see Christmas trees, I get very happy. I love Christmas trees. I love Christmas lights on the houses. It reminds me of my childhood, but I hated it when I was a young kid because I hated the Christians because I was taught in Hebrew school that all Christians are bad and they're going to kill us. I don't know if you can begin to understand where I'm coming from. So I think that I have matured, but you can only mature when you get the knowledge. that Christians are good people or bad people like the Jews. But we have common faith. God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It says 7 times in the New Testament, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I want to say indeed that I grew up studying the history of Europe, the history of America. And in 1215, how many people heard of the Magna Carta? Everybody knows about the Magna Carta. It didn't make England a democracy, but what it did was it blocked Prince John from being a totalitarian autocrat. The noblemen of England would not allow him just to do whatever he wanted. See the war in Ukraine? Russia has always been a totalitarian, despotic country, tyrannical country. They never had a Magna Carta. And the whole process of democracy has developed through this. So the Jewish people in Israel, who came from Soviet socialist countries, they don't have a democratic tradition. And the Jews who came from Islamic countries, they don't have a democratic tradition. You know when Israel will have a democratic tradition? When 6 million Jews and 4 million Christian spouses move to Israel, which I think is going to happen soon. We are approaching a Holocaust in America. I don't want to spend too much time because I've got so many other subjects to talk about, but I will conclude with one little story. Because the left-wing, liberal, communist, Bolshevik Jews, who are about 70% of the American Jews, will never invite me to speak. The only people who invite me to speak are the militias, Tea parties, Republican parties, and certain right-wing Jewish groups who are, forgive me for saying it, pro-Trump, right-wing. And there are 30%. So anyway, so I get a call from a lady friend of mine in the Villages in Florida. I was there. And she said, there's a guy who wants to meet you. Now, she didn't say to me he was a neo-Nazi. She just said to me that he is a militia guy. And so I had lunch with him, 2 hours. And we were talking about UFOs and all kinds of conspiracy theories and QAnon and all these different things. And, you know, like, I listen, I'm learning. I don't feel myself qualified to answer any of those things. And then he said to me, what do you think about the killing of George Floyd? And I said, well, George Floyd was a criminal. He should have been in jail, but that's the job of the courts. It wasn't for the policeman to kill the guy. Some people say to me, well, he actually had a drug-related condition which caused him to die much more quickly. I don't know what it is, but I said, it wasn't for the police to kill this guy. And then he said to me, what do you think about defund the police? And I said, well, I think the police should not be defunded because if you defund the police, you're going to have killing and crime and chaos. And he was nodding his head no. And I said, what do you mean no? And he said, no, you see, before the killing of George Floyd, we had 3 million militia members. And today, we don't have 3 million militia members, we have 30 million. 30 million militia members in America, and the first thing we're going to do is kill the Jews. The guy said it to me, that we're going to kill all the Jews in America. Except for you, Avi. You are a right-winger like us. I got up, I said, I can't sit with you, goodbye. I went. And I wrote a letter to the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, and I said, Israel had better start preparing for mass immigration of Jews to Israel. A few weeks later, I came back to the States. Just before I came, I heard on the Israeli radio that the Israeli government has drawn up plans for the emergency absorption of 500,000 Jews from the United States. This is about 1.5 years ago. I'm telling you, people like Schumer and Schiff cause normal Americans to go crazy. They make me crazy. And what the problem of the Jews is, the Jews don't understand that we are creating the anti-Semitism against us with our own hands. And you have to remember, it's not because we're bad people. It's because it's a Jewish tradition to be internationalists. It is a Jewish tradition not to support nationalism. Nationalism is Christianism. In Europe, all the nationalisms were Christian. You didn't see Jews as European nationalists. So this transferred to the United States. Whereas the United States loves the Jews and blesses the Jews, and Jews in America should be nationalists, and 30% are, but you've got some people who it's in their genes to hate the Jews and want to kill them. Now, you remember what I said at the very beginning, that Ben-Gurion said the Jews have to go home. In Hebrew school, we were taught that all the Christians hate us, and that was not true, but that there is going to be a Holocaust in the U.S. Now, I don't know, Mark, if I ever spoke about it when I was here, but in 1999, I was in Canada, in Edmonton, and I received a message that there are Muslim terrorists who are paid for by the governments in the Middle East, and they have machine guns, and they have bullets, and they have all these weapons. This is before 9/11 even. And there is a plan by the Muslims also to catalog the Jews and their Christian spouses and the Christians who love Israel and the Jews. Catalog them and prepare them for the day of the great slaughter. This is part of the Islamic agenda. So now I start thinking to myself, God in heaven, we have millions of Muslims who want to kill the Jews. I think there are 30 million Muslims in America, so 10% would be 3 million. There are 30 million militia members. I would say 90% are not anti-Semites, but good Christians. So 10% were terrorists. So that's 6 million already. And there are 6 million Jews. There's only one group in the United States that will not listen to me. That's the Jews. There's only one group in America that doesn't want to have guns. That's the Jews, except for a few. This is exactly like in Europe in the 1930s, where the Jews were saying Hitler would never do any of this stuff to us. And then it happened. And the rabbis in Europe said to the Jews, no, don't go, it's never going to happen. The Germans were good to us in World War I. It's true the Germans were good to us in World War I. How many people know that Hitler killed 7 million Christians in addition to the 6 million Jews? I heard that from Michael Savage. Michael Savage on the radio show, he said, anyone who denies the Jewish Holocaust denies the Christian Holocaust as well. Okay, this is getting off the point now. It's true, but it's... So then there's a group called Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, these people were founded by whom? Islamic Jihad. And they're armed. And who do they hate? The slumlords. Who are the slumlords? The Jews. Why do they hate the Jews? Because the Jews support abortion. Abortion of whom? Black kids. It's interesting that many of the people in the black communities oppose abortion. But the Democrats, liberals, support abortion, and many of them are Jews. It's because it's black kids. I mean, there are things that are twisted in such a way, it turns into anti-Semitism. And then there's Antifa. Antifa is a Bolshevik, anti-Christian, anti-Jewish organization, Bolsheviks. And so my contention, this basically seals the first part of my message tonight, is that America is on the verge of a civil war. Everyone is ready, everyone has guns, everyone has ammunition. I pray to God I'm wrong, because I love America. I don't want to see any American die. And I don't know if you know this or not, but the Russians and the Chinese, their dream is for America to self-destruct. And so when I'm in the churches, I try to explain this is what America has to do to save itself from being destroyed from within. Okay. Now what I want to do is, I'm shifting gears, and I'm going over to Israel. Remember what I said about Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof? So we had the same thing in Israel. The Jewish people from Russia, from Ukraine, from all these areas, they decided to become communists because all the troubles we suffered through in Russia and Ukraine and Poland, all these, it's because of God. You know, in Christianity, you have something called Ephesians, you know, the one new man in Christ. So the communists have the one new man in Marx, Karl Marx. You abolish God, poof, all the hatred is gone. That was the thinking of the communists and socialists. But what happened was they still hated the Jews, even after they were all communists and in the Bolshevik Revolutionary War. So what happened was many of these communist, Bolshevik, Marxist Jews fled from Russia, Ukraine. They came to Israel. And they said, well, we still believe in the ideology, but we can't do it in Russia because they hate us. So we are going to conquer the swamps and the deserts, replant the trees in the Holy Land, and we will create a utopia of socialist communist values. And so from the very outset of the Jewish resurrection in the land of Israel, the socialists and communists dominated. Now, remember I told you my wife was with a group of Argentine students in the bus, and they were mocking me because I was wearing like a paramilitary uniform of the Beitar youth movement, which is considered, Jabotinsky was considered right-wing. And 1922 was an important year. How many people here heard of Mussolini? Mussolini got elected as the leader of Italy in 1922. Now, what was happening in 1922? You had street battles throughout Europe between communists and fascists. When you have street battles between communists and fascists, one side's going to win and the other side's going to lose. And when one side wins, it kills the people on the other side, or they flee. And so the Jews who were in Israel, who were socialists and communists, said, we don't want these Beitar right-wing Jews, here in Israel. Because I belong to the nationalist group. Remember, I grew up in America, the Christians hate us and we've got to leave. So I went to Israel thinking if I'm a nationalist, then I'm doing the right thing. No, in Israel, you had to be socialist, you had to be communist, you had to be right-wing, left-wing. And this was the case for decades. Okay, comes the Holocaust. And I have to tell you, I don't have it in front of me to share with you, but Ben-Gurion in 1942 wrote a letter saying, we do not want the Orthodox Jews here. We want the new man in Marx. We want the new Israeli. The new Israeli is going to be communist or socialist. No kippah, no phylacteries, no Shabbat, no kosher. And we're going to conquer the land. We're going to turn the deserts green. We're going to drain the swamps. And you know what? God knows how to use the people who are considered anti-God. Because they do the work. But what happened was in 1949, when the destruction of the Jewish community became evident, became clear, Ben-Gurion decided that he had to help the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox to resurrect their numbers. And so he decided in 1949 to give 500 military exemptions to yeshiva students. 500 exemptions, let them get married, let them have children. The population of Israel then was about 700,000. Today the population is about 7 million, 10 times as many. How many exemptions are issued today? I mean, what? No. Let me talk because I have the numbers. So it went from 700,000 to 7 million. So that's 10 times as much. So if 500 exemptions were issued in 1949 and it's 10 times as many people now, you'd think 5,000 exemptions. Do you know how many exemptions there are today for Orthodox yeshiva students? Not 5,000, 140,000. Now what happens is these yeshiva students are not allowed to work by their rabbis. They're not allowed to serve in the army by their rabbis. What they are commanded is constantly be studying, get married very young, and have 10 children each. That's 1949 to today. You have 3 generations, 4 generations already. Somebody has to pay for that. And these kids get married, they have 10 kids. It's like trying to swim with an anchor around your neck. You cannot do it. And these rabbis today dictate to Netanyahu what needs to be done in Israel. You know what needs to be done in Israel? An authoritarian, theocratic state like Iran. I want you to know, I always admired Netanyahu as the greatest and longest serving prime minister we ever had. But today, Netanyahu is totally dependent on the ultra-Orthodox to maintain a coalition. And I founded my party because I said to myself, hey, you know, these Arab Christians who live in Israel, they've been here 2,000 years from the time of Christ. They're 100,000. They have no representation. The Russians, 400,000. They have no representation. No, excuse me, 600,000. So we have a very big, considerable Christian population living in Israel, but they have no representation. And of course, we hate the Messianics, and we hate the Arab Christians. And I don't say me, I'm saying the Israelis. They hated us, we hate them. Hate begets hate. What did Jesus teach? Love the Lord thy God, love thy fellow as thyself, love thy enemy. You know, I go to synagogues, I say, hey, I love the enemy. The rabbis say, where did you get that nonsense from? If I say JC from Nazareth, I'm out of that synagogue real fast. So, the fact that the rabbis hate the Messianics, I understand, 10,000 of them. They hate the Arab Christians, 100,000. They hate the Russian Christians, 600,000. Okay. But then the rabbis come out. Are you holding on to your seats? We hate the Reformed Jews of America. We don't want them in Israel. We hate the conservative Jews. I grew up in a conservative synagogue in New York. We hate the conservative Jews. We hate the unaffiliated Jews. And of course, the Jews are married to 80% to Christians, or shall I say non-Jews. We hate them too. And we're going to block them. We're not going to let them move to Israel. Let me tell you, the rabbis who say that are going to get a giant anema of 10 million immigrants. Because that's what God, I think, is going to do. It's not dependent on what we want. Wait a second. Is the Messiah coming only for the Jehovah's Witnesses? Is the Messiah coming only for the Southern Baptists? Now, you know the difference between Southern Baptists and Northern Baptists? Northern Baptists go to hell. That's a Texas joke. I know you like Texas jokes. Is the Messiah coming only for the Jews? If the Messiah is coming only for the Jews, it ain't the Messiah, because the Messiah is coming for all of humanity. I mean, that's the way I see it. I get into a lot of trouble for saying, why do the Jews and the Christians marry? Because then when the Jew moves to Israel, he's got to take, or she's got to take the Christian spouse with them. So the rabbis say, oh, Avi Lipkin supports intermarriage. Doesn't matter what I support or I don't support. What matters is what is God's plan for the Messiah. Is the Messiah going to come for everyone? Then everyone has to be there. How is everyone going to be there? When the Holocaust takes place, I don't want to say when. Let's say if the Holocaust takes place, or if there are massacres of Jews independently in different places, Jews eventually are going to say, hey, we got to get out of here. It happened in every country in Europe. And so the Jews are going to end up moving to Israel with their Christian spouses. Our population today, like I said, is 7 million Jews and about 500,000 Christians plus minus. I'm predicting very soon, I don't know if it's today, tomorrow, or in a decade, but I think less than a decade, our population is going to double. Go from 7.5 million to 15 million. Maybe triple. Now comes another interesting point. And again, I have to praise my wife, Rachel. And you have to remember, if I had yelled at my wife like I did on the bus, 14th of January, 1970, if I did that today, I'd be arrested for harassment. But we got married. Rachel has been my teacher because she came from Egypt. Arabic was her mother tongue, and she worked for 30 years for Israeli intelligence. And she's been telling me every day what they're saying, what they're really saying in Arabic. So, for example, 35 years ago, she retired 5 years ago. 35 years ago, she picked up a Saudi broadcast. America is the great Christian Satan. You all know that. Well, that's what the Arab Muslims say. But America soon will not be the great Christian Satan because we're going to send so many tens of millions of Muslims to live in America that America will become a Muslim country. That's how their plan is, to make America a Muslim country. Even if it takes 150 years, they said. Now, 5 years ago, when my wife left her work, she picked up a broadcast where the Saudis were saying, we thought it was going to take 150 years. We were wrong. It's only going to take 30 years to make America a Muslim country. Buy out of the banks and buy out of the corporations and buy out of the media, buy out of the politicians. America is becoming a Muslim country. And because there's no freedom of speech anymore in the country, you can't even talk about it. So my wife picked up other broadcasts. You've heard of ISIS. ISIS supposedly was defeated in Iraq and in Syria. And I love you. I'm watching you. I'm watching your body language and your responses. You know, you have the king of Saudi Arabia. You know, I had a big fight with people from Chuck Missler's ministry because I said that, from what my wife picked up, 92% of Saudi population is pro-ISIS. 92%. Pro-ISIS. 92%. 8% support the king and his royal family. So ISIS has been saying consistently, nobody's listening, nobody's paying attention. We will kill the king of Saudi Arabia. We know secretly is a Jew. That's what they say. And we're going to kill the royal family. And Mecca and Saudi Arabia are the right places for the renewal of the Islamic Caliphate. You ever hear King Abdullah of Jordan? We're going to kill him and his family too. Jordan and Saudi Arabia are one country. And you remember, no, they are independent, but I'm saying the Muslims are saying that the territory is artificially created by the British and the French in World War I. Jordan should be part of Saudi, but it should all be caliphate. Okay. Now I'm going to share something with you, and this will aim us into something. How much more time do I have? It says 7:58. Okay. I told you, I'm a Pentecostal Jew. I go for 3 hours. So, you know that you have a country called Lebanon, and you have a country called Syria. And as part of Lebanon and part of Syria, there's an ethnic group there called the Druze. How many people heard of the Druze? D-R-U-Z-E. And they're wonderful people. The Israeli Jews, fantastic. And they serve in our army. And they have spilled a lot of blood for the Jewish state. But the Jews of Lebanon fight for Lebanon, and the Jews of Syria fight for Syria, and the Jews of Jordan fight for Jordan. Now, in 2011, you had the beginning of the Arab Spring. And the Arab Spring basically was the Arab winter, civil war and killing. And the Druze have a mountain in the south of Syria called Mountain of the Druze. And it was surrounded by ISIS. And the Druze are hated by the Sunni Muslims. The Sunni Muslims want to kill all the Druze. And so they were surrounded, and they were going to be annihilated. And so the Druze of Israel came to Netanyahu and said to Netanyahu, there's one of two possibilities. Either Israel invades, now you're listening, Israel invades the south of Syria, links up with the mountain of the Druze, and Israel extends its umbrella of protection to the Druze. Either Israel does that, or the Druze said, let us go. We Druze will volunteer, and we will go to defend our Druze brethren in Syria. You know what Netanyahu did? Netanyahu flew to Moscow. And he said to Putin, he said, Bashar al-Assad is your client state. They cannot defend themselves against ISIS. ISIS was winning in 2011, 2012. And so Russia sent its military into Syria. I mean, the Russians clobbered the Sunnis, really destroyed them. You know, Syria was a country of 20 million people. Today, Syria is 10 million. 10 million people were expelled. 500,000 were killed by the Russian intervention. But the Russians saved the day for the Druze and the Christians. You've got 2 million Christians in Damascus. Same with Lebanon. Lebanon is divided amongst 4 different ethnic groups. You have Sunnis, Shiites, Druze, and Christians. And by the way, these groups are all divided against each other also. Trying to do business with the Middle East is like trying to herd cats. You cannot herd cats. Everyone goes in a different direction. So ISIS is saying, now listen, ISIS is saying Russia will pull out of Syria, we take Syria. And if we take Syria, we take Lebanon. What does it mean we take? We kill. We kill the Christians. We kill the Druze. We kill the Shiites. We kill the Kurds. We kill the Yazidis. We kill everybody. And then when we're finished killing everybody, then we destroy Israel. Because you're going to have the flags of ISIS all along the border with Israel. And they're going to be digging tunnels underneath the Jordan River and underneath the borders to infiltrate and send millions, if not tens of millions, of volunteer Sunni Muslim soldiers to attack Israel. Yeah, it is totally Sunni. I'm getting to a very important point here. Okay, in one sentence, the Shiites are following the genealogy of the children of Muhammad and the caliphs who were part of the Shiites. The Sunnis follow the 3 caliphs, Abu Bakr, Omar, and there was a third one, I don't know. But you know what it's like? It's like, doesn't the mafia have families? And the families have family values. The family values are you don't tread on the turf of that family. Islam is about Shiites and Sunnis slaughtering each other. This has been going on for 1,400 years. So I'm going to say something very strange now. I pray to God that Israel and the United States do not have to go to war with Iran. Or if we go to war with Iran, it's to attack only the targets of the Revolutionary Guards and the atomic process. We are not enemies of the Iranian people, and they are not enemies of ours. And they're Shiites, okay? I don't know how many of you, I'm almost sure it wasn't in the news here, there's a Shiite country called Azerbaijan. How many people heard of Azerbaijan? Very good group. Azerbaijan opened up an embassy in Tel Aviv. It's the first Shiite country to recognize Israel. Actually, not the first. I think Morocco also is officially Shiite. And so, in my opinion, there's going to be a total shift. Israel, this will sound crazy, Israel will realign itself with the Shiites. The Sunnis who made peace with the Abraham Accords are going to go against Israel because the Palestinians are Sunnis, and they're Sunnis, and the Palestinians are going to push for it. And there's a subject that I want to talk about, God willing, when I come back when I come back, May, June. I'm going to be talking about the rise of the Turkish military force against Israel. And I'm in the process of writing my 8th book now. I've got 7 books downstairs on the table. By the way, I want you to know, without turning it into a commercial, The price of the books is $20 each, but tonight everything is half price. Books, CDs, DVDs, everything is $10. Whatever I don't sell tonight, I leave here, and El Shaddai will sell them, but the price will be $20 because it's going to cost them $10. The price, so you're getting the wholesale price tonight if you get the books, CDs, and DVDs. My 8th book is going to be called The Battle of Lepanto and Armageddon. How many people heard of Lepanto? Lepanto. Okay, now, how many people heard of the Battle of the Spanish Armada? Everybody heard about the Battle of the Spanish Armada because the Protestants of England and Holland whipped the Catholics. I mean, we all hate the Catholics, right? But the Battle of Lepanto was a Catholic victory in 1571 over the Muslim Turks in the Mediterranean. Lepanto, it's an area of Greece called Lepanto, and the whole Turkish fleet was sunk. 1571, April. How many people remember Miguel de Cervantes? Man of La Mancha? Don Quixote? Miguel de Cervantes lost his right arm in the Battle of Lepanto, fighting the Turks. The reason he wrote Man of La Mancha was because he felt that the Spanish were so busy now with intrigues and intermarriage with the Austrian, the Habsburgs, that they forgot about the battles with the Muslims. He gave his arm for Spain to defeat the Muslims, and they defeated the Muslims. I have a friend who is a Greek Cypriot, and we're very close friends. I'm going to make the story very short because we're running out of time. For those, how many people have been in Cyprus? Okay, I see one hand over there. Anyone else? Cyprus is an island which has two areas of mountains. One is Troodos Mountains, which are to the west, and then there's a range of mountains to the north in the north of Cyprus. And my Greek friend had a summer house there in Kyrenia. Kyrenia is one of these villages where Greeks used to have houses. And it was July 14th. I will never forget the date because I was in the army, in artillery. And we were told by our commanders in the Israeli army that the Turks were going to invade the next day. We knew they were going to invade. So we were on alert. And so this Greek friend of mine says to me that 5 a.m, he got up to get a glass of water. And in July, 5 a.m, it's light out. He looked out his kitchen window. He saw the whole Turkish fleet right outside his window with all the red flags of Turkey. He woke up his wife and his kids in pajamas, got in the car, and they were going down the mountain to Nicosia, and they could see the parachutes of the paratroopers, Turkish paratroopers coming down. Had they not left, they would have been dead because the Turks killed everybody. Okay, you have to remember, this is not the Middle East. This is not the Midwest. This is the Middle East. 74, July 14th. I'm telling you, I was in artillery, so I remember. I was in Israel in artillery, but our commanders had us on alert because they knew that it was going to happen. You were there? During the Turkish invasion. Well, anyway, the point is the Turks can conquer the island in 24 hours. Now, what's happening now, how many people heard that they found gas in the Mediterranean underneath the sea? Well, they found gas fields that belonged to Israel, and they found gas fields that belonged to Cyprus. So guess what? The Greeks, who always hated the Jews, now the Greeks and the Jews became allies. And they're developing the gas fields together. So you have a pipeline now is being laid for the gas from the Israeli fields to Cyprus, and from Cyprus to Greece, and from Greece to Italy. And I don't know how long it's going to take to reach Italy, but the idea is to help cushion the blow of the embargo on the Russian gas and oil. Yes. Well, yes, that's happening already now. In other words, we have pipelines to Egypt, comes to Israel, we pipe it to Egypt, they turn it into liquefied gas, and then they re-export it. So it's already beginning to help, but what they want to do is they want to have a pipeline that goes straight to Europe. So what happens? So now the Turks come, And from the Turkish perspective, the Turks are right. The British took Cyprus away from the Turks in 1878. And they got a lease for 99 years. Right, and the Turks want it back. Turks want Cyprus back. It ended already. So the Turks are right from their perspective that they want to take the rest of Cyprus and they want to negotiate the gas. Of course it's huge, but none of this is ever discussed in the media. And so what I'm predicting is, I don't know if you know this or not, but the topography of Cyprus is similar to the topography of Lebanon. So the Israeli commandos train in Cyprus as if they were going to go into battle in Lebanon, which could also happen. Okay. So I predict one day the Turkish Navy will come and the Israelis are going to sink the Turkish Navy. So I call my 8th book Lepanto II. In other words, the battle was 1571, it's going to be another battle with the Turks. The Israelis will win, however, okay, now here comes something really crazy. How many Turks are there in the world? In Anatolia, Turkey, you have 70 million. But from the 6 republics that broke away from the former Soviet Union, you got 200 million Turks. 270 million. Now, I want to share something with I'm sure that it's not covered in the media here. Why don't the Europeans want Turkey in the European Union? Okay, so let's do numbers. In Europe today, you have 300 million, I don't want to say Christians because Christianity is pretty much dead in Europe today, but you have 300 million non-Muslims. And they have 50 million Muslims. Okay, so 300 versus 50. Not a big deal, right? If Turkey joins, then it's 50 million that are already in Europe, plus another 70 million from Turkey. So it's 120 million. Still, the non-Muslims are 300 million. But the Turks, if you ever go to Turkey, government offices or schools, and you look at the map on the wall, it's Turkey from China all the way to Morocco. Because that was the Turkish Empire. And so the 6 republics that broke away, the Soviet Union used to be a Muslim country. It was 350 million, of which 200 million were Muslim, majority. So when the Russian people dislodged themselves of the 6 Islamic republics in the south, now today Russia is 150, 140 million people, and 200 million Muslims in the 6 republics. So 200 million Turkic Muslims with 70 million, with 50 million in Europe already, that's 320 million. The moment Turkey joins the European Union, all those Muslims are Turkish citizens and then they're all European citizens. So Europe becomes a Muslim continent overnight. That's why none of the European countries want the Turks. And so my contention is the Armageddon War will happen when all those Turks come against Israel because Israel sank their navy. There will be a tremendous resurgence of Sunni hatred against the Jews. Today the Sunnis seem to be pals with the Israelis. This is all a fantasy. And so one of the things I'm predicting is Israel will have to defend itself when ISIS, which is also Sunni. All these Sunni forces are going to join. They're going to come against Israel. And so Israel will have to, again, consider invading Syria to defend the Druze and to defend the Christians and the Shiites. They'll all be slaughtered. The Sunnis hate the Shiites more than they hate the Jews because the Jews, for them, are inconsequential. The real enemy is the Shiites. So, think for a moment. Do you know how far the Euphrates River is from Israel, from the Golan Heights? About a 5-hour drive. It's not a big piece of territory. The Bible talks about from the Nile to the Euphrates. This is going to be in our time. And I want to tell you something. One of my big fights with Chuck Missler always was, he said, Russia is the Armageddon. Russia is not the Armageddon. Russia, you might not like Russian Orthodoxy, but they are not Muslims. They're not the Armageddon. The Armageddon is the hundreds and hundreds of millions of Muslims who will come from Turkey and through Turkey to attack Israel. And I have news for you. We're going to need millions and millions of Christians to join us. Now, if the rabbis hear that, they're going to really kill me. The way I see it, the Christians and the Jews are going to be moving to Israel. And part of my dream, part of my vision, is that we will restore Lebanon as a Christian nation. We will restore the Syrians as a Christian nation. Of course, with Druze minority. Jordan and Saudi Arabia have only Muslim populations pretty much. So we will allow Jews and Christians to live in all these countries. But, people say to me, well, you're going to let the Christians become the majority. Well, not in the land, specifically the land of Israel as we know it today, but in the neighboring lands, they will be Christian, autonomous, federated republics. That's the way I see it. And so people say to me, well, how are you going to do it? Because it's desert. Well, did you ever hear of desalination? Israel is the foremost expert in desalination. And we're the foremost expert in solar energy, green energy. We're going to turn all of these deserts green. We are going to turn the Middle East, the Jews and the Christians are going to turn the Middle East into a flowering Garden of Eden. This is my vision. The Messiah will come and return when either we've done it or we are in the process of doing it, of turning the Middle East into a flowering garden. Well, we're doing it now, but I'm talking about from the Nile to the Euphrates will be lush as it was thousands of years ago. The Fertile Crescent, yes.
He would design a divine coast of Israel. Not give it away. You will not own my land.
Who will not take? Who will not take it?
Other countries.
Other countries, yes.
Yeah, Churchill gave part of Lebanon.
We know the history, but the point I'm saying is that the Jews and the Christians together are going to turn the deserts green, and that we, for our own survival, must embrace the Christians and help them to come home to the land of Israel.
Amen.
And that pretty much is my message tonight. And I see your hands are up already. Yes?
My thoughts are read that Israel. To me, that's when
Okay, now I want to first tell you one thing about Russia. Russia has been fighting the Sunni Muslims, the Turks, for 1,000 years. The Russians have a very bloody history with the Muslims. Now, because the Iranians are Shiites and they're the enemies of the Sunnis, the enemy of my enemy is my ally. That's why I'm saying I would not be surprised if we see in Iran a revolution which will be welcomed by all of humanity. And I know this will sound very strange now. Putin will be out. Putin started a totally needless war with Ukraine. But the Russians have a 1,000-year history with the Turks. And so if the alliances shift and Israel becomes aligned with the Shiites are going to need us to defend them from the Sunnis. Because the Shiites are only 15% of Islam. 85% of Islam is Sunni. And so the Russians, I believe, who have always been allies with the Shiites, will one day become allies of Israel again also, the Russians. That's one of the reasons why Israel is neutral in the war with Ukraine. We don't take sides. We help the Ukrainians with certain things, but we don't go against the Russians. Besides the fact that there are 1 million Jews living in Russia, and the Russian army today still is in Damascus. Yes?
What do you think of the China involvement with either Russia or Taiwan?
Okay. Firstly, I think that China is so focused on attacking Taiwan, and they are so focused on what they consider the weakness of the United States, that they will do the same mistake with Taiwan that Russia made with Ukraine. And I have to tell you, in my personal opinion, that Biden might not be God's man, but God can even use somebody like Biden to put a hook in the mouth of the Russians to bring them to attack Ukraine. And I have to tell you, I mourn equally for the 100,000 Russian troops who died, as well as the 100,000 Ukrainians who died. And I really hope that an end to this war will happen soon. My family came from Ukraine and from Poland, and I know the history of Russia very well, but one of the things I want to stress, the Russians have been fighting the Sunni Turks for 1,000 years. And so if Israel has to go to war with Turkey, I don't think that Russia will support the Turks. We have to maintain a channel of communications with the Russians. I know that'll sound bad for many of you who support the Ukrainians. I support the Ukrainians personally, but I feel bad for the Russians. I don't know if you know this, Russia is a dying country. Their population is shrinking because people are simply fleeing the country. And Ukrainians are suffering, and Russians. This is the first major war in Europe since World War II. Crazy. 140 to 145 million. And the Ukrainians are about 40 million. Okay. How many American soldiers have died in this process? None. Well, no, there are undercover and there are volunteers who go to fight for the Ukrainians. But it's not like the Korean War, where I think 50,000 died in the Korean War, or 50,000 died in the Vietnam War, and 500,000 died in World War II. Americans don't want to go through that again. So give the Ukrainians the wherewithal to fight and save America from doing it. I'll say another thing also. Weaponries become aged after a while. You can't use them. So America's unloading all the old stuff, and the military-industrial complex is making a lot of money now reproducing the new weaponries. Yes.
Anybody else who hasn't asked a question? You've asked a question.
He can ask a question as long as he doesn't start telling his jokes.
Oh, go ahead. Let me get the Lance.
You said that there's like 100 million Christians, and there's a need for them to join what's going to happen in the future. How are the Christians going to get to join, being that there is for lack of better terminology, a prohibition from Christians to make it into Israel, things like that? So what's your vision in how that's going to take place?
Okay, well, firstly, it's a fantastic question. It's very, very much in place. At this point, the rabbis and even people who are not maybe very religious, Israel is the one and only Jewish state. So there are many people in Israel who don't want Christians coming to the land. At this time, the only Christians who can move to the land of Israel are those who are married to Jews or have Jewish blood, one Jewish grandparent. This is called the law of return. So what the rabbis want to do, Smotrich and others, they want to change the law of return. Then instead of one Jewish grandparent, they'll narrow it down to one Jewish parent. But Netanyahu has announced he's not going to tolerate that. In other words, if there's going to be a Holocaust and you don't allow the people in, you're condemning them to death. So at this stage, we're talking about, let's say, 10 million immigrants, 6 million are Jews, 4 million are Christian. Percentage-wise, the Christian population will grow from 6, 7, 8% to about 20 or 30%. But still, it's a Jewish majority state. What I'm talking about is the next stage in which Christians and Jews can go live in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Saudi as part of the United States of Israel. Yes.
I had heard that Turkey, Russia,
Okay, the Turks, kind of like Israel, are trying to walk on a tightrope of neutrality between Ukraine and Russia. The war between Ukraine and Russia is a horrible thing, totally unnecessary. And it may be indeed that Putin has to be out before any substantive peace relations can be established between Ukraine and Russia. You know, I have to add one thing. There are many, many people in Russia and Ukraine who are half Russian, half Ukrainian, you know, intermarried families. And a lot of people in Ukraine and in Russia are saying, you know, forgive the expression, like, what the hell is going on here? This is not something that we should even be involved in. Get rid of Putin and start all over again, you know? So, I don't know. Listen, I have to tell you something. I heard bad things about the Ukrainians in history towards the Jews. My father's second cousin was in Babi Yar. I don't know if you all heard of Babi Yar, but
Yeah.
she was shot by a firing squad and fell into a heap of bodies. She had 3 bullets in her, and but she didn't get killed. And when it got dark, she got up and crawled out through all the bodies, went back to her apartment building, and the Ukrainians hid her and took care of her the rest of the war. So there are good Ukrainians. The problem was certain groups that were like militias and came, like here. You have fringe groups and horrible history in the past. But one of the things that gets me excited is the Ukraine is striving towards democracy, because the Ukrainians were always oriented towards the West, whereas Russia was always oriented toward Mongolia, you know, towards the Mongols.
And that's why they did not want Ukraine to join NATO.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I want to give everyone a chance to buy Avi's books downstairs, to give him a chance to sign them. So let's give Avi a big hand and go down and buy all of his books. Yay! Thank you very much. What a blessing. Thank you. Go down and get a book.
Just remember, the book is $10. The autograph is $100.
Why don't you remind him of your website again?
.com is the website. Biblical Alliance, and you have the Bible Block Party also. Bible Block, BLOC, and there's other information there too.
All right, and every book and DVD is $10.
Everything is $10, right? And like I said before, the normal price is $20. So you know, after I'm gone tonight, the price for the ministry will be $20 to the public.
All right, well, thank you.
Blessing. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you bet.